Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today, and a particular thank you to Skip and to the entire team here at the school for the partnership that, as Skip mentioned, has become one of our defining characteristics. We at Arkansas Rep so value our relationship with the Clinton School. It enriches the work we do on Main Street, and we take pride in the contribution we can make to the discourse, to the intellectual discourse that we're able to engage in. This is the only forum that the Rep has outside of our building where we get to talk about, in depth, the artistic work that we do at the theater. And that's incredibly valuable to us. It's incredibly rare, and we're grateful to Skip and to everybody here for making it happen as we wind up our 36th season. And this has been, I don't know how many years we've been doing this. I think it's at least 3 or 4, isn't it, Skip? And we're so thankful to be able to continue this relationship as we move into our 37th season. And thank you all for being here today. I'm joined on stage, and it's my honor to welcome Austin Pendleton here to our series and also to the Rep and to Little Rock. Austin is the director of A Loss of Roses, the production that opens, has its first preview tonight. So it's a rare and wonderful thing for Austin to be here, because this is a crucial time in the evolution of a production, the first preview. And I know we have rehearsals today, and so we're very grateful, Austin, that you've taken the time out of your schedule to join us in this conversation about A Loss of Roses. Austin's bio is available to you in the literature that you have there at your table. It is a long and distinguished bio, and I hope you'll take the opportunity to read it. Austin is playwright, actor, director. I don't know if you would say it in that order. But his work spans the entire definition of our art form. And so for Austin to be here with us at Arkansas Rep has been a distinct privilege and an honor. Austin came to us directly from London, where he directed a production of a new play called Detroit, which he also directed at the Steppenwolf Theater in Chicago, and which we hope someday we'll be able to see in New York. And so, of course, when you're in London and you're directing a play in London, where else are you going to come but Little Rock, Arkansas? And so we're glad to have you here, Austin.
Thank you, thank you.
And let's begin. You know, A Loss of Roses is the final play of our current season. And it is a play that I would venture to say most folks haven't heard of, although you may have heard of its author, William Inge, because perhaps you've heard of his famous plays Bus Stop, or Picnic, or Come Back Little Sheba, which was his first Broadway success, or his screenplay for which he won an Academy Award, Splendor in the Grass. So he has a name that is prominent in our art form. But his play, A Loss of Roses, you may not have heard of, even though Inge considered it his most favorite play. So as we get into a conversation about the production, let's begin the conversation by talking about the playwright. Austin, this is a playwright you've been familiar with for years and years. Talk to us a little bit about William Inge. Who was he? Why is he significant?
William Inge was, he grew up in Kansas, where this play is set, and where almost all of his plays are set. I mean the well-known ones that, he had an extraordinary thing. He was a frustrated young man, didn't know what to do with his life. He taught acting, and he taught in courses related to drama and English in some of the colleges in that part of the country. Kansas, Missouri, you know, he was very frustrated, he was unhappy. He was beginning to have problems with alcoholism. I think he was becoming aware, probably he was homosexual, and he was a boy from Kansas. He grew up, he was born in 1913. Those were a small town, Kansas. That was an easy place, was not an easy place to grow up, to be gay, you know. There weren't like support groups, you know, and there wasn't a support group at home either for what he considered to be his problems. Today, happily, they wouldn't be considered problems, except by a few people, but so he had all that to struggle with, on top of which he was shy. He was different, and he didn't know what to do with his life. Then he met Tennessee Williams. He was, for a couple of years, he was a drama critic on a newspaper in St. Louis, and Tennessee Williams was his first big success. The Glass Menagerie, do you know that play, was trying out in Chicago, and at that time, people had no idea what was going to happen with that play. The producers didn't even have the money to take it to Broadway. I mean, the Glass Menagerie. It's hard to believe now, but so it was opening in Chicago, and Tennessee Williams came down to St. Louis to see his mom, who still lived there, and in St. Louis, and he was being interviewed by the critic from the paper, who was William Inge, and they talked and talked, and then William Inge went up to Chicago to see the Glass Menagerie, and his life changed. He thought, well, look what you can do when you write for the stage. Actually, I'm not comparing myself to William Inge, but I directed at Steppenwolf in Chicago some years ago, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof by Tennessee Williams, and I said to myself, conducting a rehearsal one day, look what you can do when you write for the stage, and that's when I started to write plays. So Tennessee Williams, God knows how many people he's influenced that way. So anyway, William Inge began to write for the stage, and within a couple of years, he wrote the play that then became Picnic, which was, of course, a huge success for him a few years later. The play that became his autobiographical play, The Dark at the Top of the Stairs, and then he wrote Come Back Little Sheba. He wrote Come Back Little Sheba in a couple of weeks, just all poured out of him. And Come Back Little Sheba was then produced on Broadway and was a success. Then Picnic was produced on Broadway and became a success. Each of them became very important films also. Bus Stop, which I have directed a couple of years ago with two of the actresses who are in A Loss of Roses now, was a big success on Broadway, became an extremely well-known film, and then finally The Dark at the Top of the Stairs was a huge success. And he was like, I don't think any playwright has had that kind of uninterrupted success on Broadway ever. His first 4 plays were successful, extremely successful. Are all of them still produced and were made into successful films? Then he wrote A Loss of Roses. I was in college. I was an undergraduate at Yale, which easy access to New York, so I used to go and see shows all the time. And I remember hearing that A Loss of Roses was in trouble, as they called it, on the road, in the out-of-town tryout. And I remember people thinking, this is inconceivable. It's by William Inge. How could it be in trouble? And then I remember reading the reviews the day after the Broadway opening, and some of them were compassionate, saying, now wait, there are good things here. It doesn't work, but there are some good things. And then there were reviews that just said, this is a disaster. And then it closed. I didn't see it. It closed within a couple of weeks, I think, which was unheard of for a William Inge play. For years and years and years, not every day, maybe once every 6 or 7 years, I would think, what could have happened with that play? I'd never read it. I'd never seen it. Then finally, in 2003, I had occasion to read it. And I thought, well, this is beautiful. It's difficult. It's a more difficult play than the ones that have been huge hits, although those plays aren't easy. They're very honest and complicated plays, but this one is more treacherous than those 4. And I thought, I found myself haunted by it after I had read it in 2003. I read it after all those years. It was first produced on Broadway in 1959. Finally, in 2003, I got around to reading it. And I began to assign scenes from it in my acting class in New York, and the students would really respond to it. And I became I said, I'd like to direct this play. It had its very unsuccessful production on Broadway, on which very talented people worked. And it was a total flop. It began the career of Warren Beatty. It was his first big thing. And that led to him being in Splendor in the Grass, also by Inge in the film, and then that led to his career. So that was the one positive thing that came out of that production, and it shattered Inge. Inge, as I've tried to indicate, was a very fragile man. It could be argued he never got over the failure of A Loss of Roses. And then his next play was a flop. And his next play after that was a flop. And that was the last play of his ever done on Broadway. And then 14 years after the flop of A Loss of Roses, Inge committed suicide in the garage of his sister's home in the middle of the night in Los Angeles. So he's a tragic figure. And his friend Tennessee said things in his memoirs 2 years after Inge died, said things like, well, Bill's problem was he couldn't take failure, you know, which is a little harsh. But yeah, failure in anything is very hard. Failure in the theater, particularly if until then you have been an uninterrupted success, people who work in the theater tend sometimes, not all the time, sometimes to be very fragile. And particularly certain kinds of very talented playwrights or talented actors or directors are very fragile people. And the power of their work comes from that fragility. So you can't say, come on, pull yourself together, because, well, for one thing, they can't. And on the other hand, and at the same time, if they did, the source of the power of their work would be affected somehow. And I mean, you want them to be happy, but it's a tricky trip. Inge had never been inoculated as a professional artist to failure. And failure is humiliating. And boy, when the critics turned on him, they began to call him names. He said the most awful things about him in A Loss of Roses and the two plays after that were done on Broadway. And I mean, it's appalling to read what they say. These were people who just a couple of years before had said, he's one of the best American playwrights, he's so sensitive, he's so profound, he understands people so beautifully, and then he's been called this has-been, out of touch. So, here we are doing A Loss of Roses. And I think there's only been one or two other productions of it since the Broadway one, and one was in Florida. But some good people were in that. And the other one was someplace else, I don't know where. But it's hardly ever done. But now, thanks to the courage of Bob Hupp, we get a chance to try to do it here. And it is a difficult play. But then so are most of the plays I've directed.
Let me ask you this question, Austin. Yeah. You know, Inge, I think in the 50s and going into the early 60s, Inge was on a trajectory to be one of the great American playwrights, you know, really with Miller and Williams. And for many years, it seemed as though his plays fell out of favor, that we didn't see a lot of Inge in the commercial theater or in a lot of regional theaters.
That's right. Even the successful plays were no longer produced for a while.
But that's changed. Not just with The Loss of Roses, but with some of the more prominent shows.
Yeah, in Chicago, one year when I was there working 4 or 5 years ago, there were highly successful revivals in Chicago in the nonprofit theaters of each of the 4 hit plays that he'd had. Picnic, Come Back Little Sheba, Bus Stop, and The Dark at the Top of the Stairs. And they're being revived more in New York. I mean, the successful ones. They're coming back.
Why is that?
Well, here's my philosophy. I have no idea if there's any truth. I mean, when you talk about things in the theater, anything you say is totally unprovable. So, you know, I mean, there's no way to know. He is, among all American playwrights, to me, I remember thinking this in the 50s. When I was a kid, the poet of My mom was part of a community theater in my hometown, which is Warren, Ohio. She had been a professional actress director. She married my father, and then she got involved with the community theater in Warren. And they did, of course, the Inge plays. And it felt, I didn't have this kind of a vocabulary then. Some of you may say, thank God I didn't. But the poet of the pinched future. Here he's from a small town in Kansas, and people whose lives, they look down the road of their lives and they see not many possibilities. And the characters in Tennessee Williams' plays and Arthur Miller's plays, they deal with that by being grand and huge and romanticizing everything. And then they crash often. But but in Inge's plays, they look kind of clear-eyed, and they say, oh God, oh dear, what am I going to do? And that's the power of those plays. It's very powerful stuff. I don't know whether he ever would have been, I don't even know what I mean by this, a great playwright like Williams or Arthur Miller or O'Neill, because his themes are smaller and his language is not as elevated. His language, he captures Midwestern speech. I grew up in Ohio, and he's writing in Kansas, so it's not exactly the same, but pretty much. And he captures that laconic Midwestern speech, the way they just handle things. And they kind of quietly say, you know, I don't know, I'm frustrated, I'm lonely, but they have a vernacular way of saying it. He captures that just perfectly. Now, of course, by the time you get to a decade like the 80s in this country, the contemplation of the pinched future seemed ludicrous. People say, well, who needs these plays? This is beside the point. This is ridiculous. It began to happen, unfortunately, even while Inge was still alive, that turning against even his successful plays. And that can't have helped him. He had terrible problems with depression. Terrible problems with depression. And of course, there wasn't as sophisticated a sense of depression as there is now to help him. But but now, of course, things began to get pinched again in this country even before the great crash of 2008. So around the middle of the 2000s, these plays would start to get put on, like, as I say, in Chicago, but in New York too. And people say, wait a minute, these plays really are talking to us. So here he's back and he's talking to us. The 50s, I know, were said to be a prosperous, complacent decade, but there was still a lot of anxiety in the air, sort of conventional anxiety, and he really captured that. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what my future is. I don't know exactly what I'm here for. Just sort of not a raging, howling thing like in Tennessee Williams or Arthur Miller, but just a frustration, an everyday frustration. And the source of that has, unfortunately, returned to us with a vengeance, as we all know. And I think that may be why these plays all of a sudden seem to speak to people, because they really do. All of a sudden, a few years ago, you heard people say, God, he's a good writer again. And for years, nobody would touch these plays. Even, as I say, the successful ones. The ones that have been flops, they wouldn't touch at all. Just
Well, let me ask you this. Let's talk about A Loss of Roses. What is it about the play? And I'll just for background, about a year and a half ago, I got a call from an actress named Jean Lichty, who, just out of the blue, I didn't know Jean at all, who spoke to me about this play, A Loss of Roses, by William Inge. Now, obviously, I knew Inge. The Rep didn't have a tradition of producing Inge's plays necessarily, although we'd been talking about doing Bus Stop just in the last 4 or 5 years. But she said, she said, she introduced herself and she said, we just did a reading with Austin Pendleton at the Cherry Lane Theater of a play of Inge's called A Loss of Roses. I said, I've never even heard of it. She goes, well, it hasn't really seen the light of day since 1959. Would you be interested in talking about a production of it? And after, you know, my first question is, why are you calling me? And you know, what conversations are you having in other theaters? You know, are you just going down the phone book and starting with the A's? And so, you know, after we got over that hurdle, she sent me a copy of the play, which I read, and was immediately captured by the ideas in this play that I thought spoke to us today as if it were a brand new play. And for most of us, it will be like coming to a brand new play. We won't be familiar with the artistic footprint of the play. We'll be seeing it as if it's brand new. But look how old it is. It's 53 years old. And so I was intrigued. And that's when Austin and I met in New York. We talked more. And we had never really met until this conversation, even though for all my years in New York, I certainly knew who Austin was. He seemed always like the busiest man in theater. As a young kid, you know, learning the ropes in theater, Austin was somebody that everybody looked up to. And so, did you know that? I'm sure you knew that. Yeah. And so, it was fascinating to talk to Austin about this play. And it became clear that I thought our audience, you know, are we Southern? Are we from the Midwest? I mean, I think we're depending upon whatever restaurant you're eating in on any given night. But I think our audience, will know these people that they meet on the rep stage. These are people we grew up with. And so that's why I wanted the play to be a part of our season. Austin, what, from your perspective, having done the reading at the Cherry Lane with much of the same cast, that we'll see, right? It was Brett, no, not Brett, but Jane and Jean and Sarah. Why do you think, first of all, why was it a failure? And in New York, why do you think it was a failure? And what changed your opinion? What is it about the play that hooked you? Why do you want to direct it?
Well, first of all, my opinion didn't change because I didn't know the play at all. I was just always intrigued by the suddenness of his downfall. And I thought, wait, how could that happen? Why was it a failure on Broadway? One thing that you never learn working in the theater, which I've done since I was a kid at my mother's community theater, you never know why something is a failure. Even more disturbingly, you never know why something is a success. You just don't know. Like I've written a few plays, and I wrote one that was done a few years ago that was done in New York, haven't been done at Steppenwolf, called Orson's Shadow. And it was this big success. I nearly threw that play away 5 times while I was trying to write it, because I thought nobody is going to be interested in this. I wrote it practically on a dare from a friend of mine. And I thought, this is ridiculous, and I would just stop writing it. And then it was a success, and I would go and watch it, and it was a wonderful production. It was essentially the Chicago production from Steppenwolf, but it was a wonderful production. But I would watch it, and I would get anxious watching it. I had no idea why it was working. I mean, I could technically analyze it, maybe, sort of, but it got to be, I kept going back to it because I thought, I'm never going to have a success like this again as a writer, so I should go to it a lot. And then I would watch it and I would say, I have no idea. This is a fluke. There's no way. And the fact is, this is something that Moss Hart wrote in his autobiography, Act 1. He wrote, every time you start in a show, whether he was a playwright and a director, either one, the rules all change. Now, A Loss of Roses, it went into rehearsal and opened out of town with a very famous actress of the time who had triumphed in Come Back Little Sheba, Shirley Booth, who's exactly right for the part she was playing. And she withdrew from it when it was still in its out-of-town tryout. That can't have helped. I have no idea why. There are all these speculations. You read biographies of Inge. The director was paying too much attention to Warren Beatty, who was this young actor needing his motivation for every line and so forth. She just got impatient. and she didn't think her part was as important as the part of Lila, which is the part that Gene Lichty is playing. So she withdrew it, so he would write more for the Shirley Booth part, and she still was frustrated, and she left. So that right away, if a production is destabilized to that, and the replacement they got for her was a very fine actress of the time, but who came in only a couple of weeks before the Broadway opening, and was having trouble even kind of learning the part, and on top of it was extremely ill at the time. So all of that alone, you could say, may have had something to do with it, and all the bad vibes. And Shirley Booth, I don't think she ever, before or after that, ever withdrew from a play. And here she's in this play by the playwright who had made her name as an actress, Come Back Little Sheba. She won the Academy Award for that. She also won, I think, the Tony Award for it on Broadway. I mean, it was huge for her career, and you'd think out of sheer kind of loyalty, she would have stuck it out. And she was, I mean, I know people who worked with her, she was a nice woman. But who knows? Who knows what, I mean, I wasn't obviously at those rehearsals. And sometimes even if you're at the rehearsals, you don't know what's going on. And sometimes you get at rehearsals, and it's even worse than all of that I just described you with The Loss of Roses. And then at the last minute, it all comes together. And then everybody is friends with everybody else again. Or as my friend, the director, Peter Hunt, says, when you're a hit, everybody loves Pop the Doorman. You know what I mean? It's, and you don't know why. Again, you don't know why. But as Moss Hart says, the rules, the chemistry of every project you undertake, all the rules change. The chemistry changes every time, and you have to adjust to it and roll with it. And Alan J. Lerner, who wrote My Fair Lady, you know, for the first 2 revivals on Broadway, he insisted everything be the same as it was. I mean, all the design, everything. And so people said, why are you being so purist about this? He said, I don't know what made it work so well the first time. It could have been the chandeliers. I mean, and there's a truth to that. But on the other hand, that's not the answer to try to just, because obviously the cast wasn't the same. So yeah, it's impossible. It's frighteningly impossible. You could say it's like life. You can't go home again, all that. As Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, said, you can't step into the same river twice. I don't know how else to say it. But things went wrong. The chemistry among the people working on The Loss of Roses. Also, possibly this was 1959. It was just when a whole new kind of playwriting was beginning to come in. And maybe there was a conscious or subconscious feeling, this kind of play, Inge writes, it's over, so let's take it out on this new play. It could be, I don't know. I don't think anyone said that explicitly at the time. But there could have been just a feeling, we've seen all this. It takes place in a living room in Kansas, and there are relationships and stuff, you know. I mean, people say things like that, and sometimes a play has to be done again outside of the original time if it was done, so it can have a chance, possibly. Or possibly the play is hopelessly flawed and you'll all hate it, and you know, you just don't ever know. I hope that's not true. I think there is perhaps a hope that that may not be true. But you never know. The worst thing is tonight, the worst thing is the first preview, where everybody pours all their passion into it, including the theater itself. This theater has a magnificent support system to produce a play in. And it starts, and you realize they couldn't care less. And other times you're saying, oh, this isn't going to work at all. And then they care. And by care, I don't mean they like the characters or don't like the characters. That's not important. They're interested in what's going to happen next. You don't ever really know. Sometimes plays get all set up. Okay, we got it figured out just right. This is the moment for this play, or this musical, or this is going to work. And total indifference floods the auditorium. And so sometimes you throw together a show and you think, oh, I don't know. And it happens to hit people. It's weird. I hope you like it. Yeah.
Well, what is it about the play that you like?
I was moved, you know, people always ask me that, but plays that I choose to direct and choose not to direct. I don't know. I read a play and I respond to it. I respond to the people. I respond to how they're developed in the line of the story. I don't know why. You could almost say I direct a play in order to find out why I like it. But a play either, there's nothing theoretical about it. A play either, sometimes I'll read a play and I like it. I turn the pages, I'm interested, but I have no desire to direct it. It usually is, I don't know how to direct this. There are people who would be very good directing this, but I like this play. I just don't know. It doesn't start any response in me that could possibly lead to a coherent production. Other plays, you just think, I would really like to do this. And I have no idea why. And playwrights get angry and say, you're doing that play, you didn't do mine. I said, well, I like your play, I just didn't know what to do with it. Now, of course, you know, then, and sometimes, you know, I turn down plays. I directed a very successful revival on Broadway of The Little Foxes. Successful because A, it was okay, and B, because the star was Elizabeth Taylor. That had something to do with its success, and she was marvelous. And therefore I got offered all these scripts all through the 80s. I turned down one hit after another. The directors who took the plays would win the Tony, would go on to breathtaking careers. I turned all of these down. Every play I picked to do was a flop. Yeah, I mean, I liked them, but I would even go see the plays I turned down, and I would say, well, that's great, that director really made it work. I still don't think I could have done it. I mean, I didn't never feel like regret. I thought, they got lucky that I turned it down. And so I comfort playwrights whose plays I turned down by, I email them a list of all the plays I turned down in the 80s. Some of which the play itself would win the Tony, you know, everything. And run for 2 years and then be done all over the country. So I say, you're in good company. It's so, and then I've picked other plays that have really worked. But in the 80s, I had a batting average of 100. How do you make a batting average? 1,000?
Well, which do you want?
But I had a perfect record.
Then you had 1,000, yeah.
Of turning down hits and picking flops. Some of the flops I picked were plays I loved and still love. And we did good productions of them. And for some reason they didn't catch on, and I have no idea why. But then I've picked other plays. You see where I'm going with this. I don't know why. I know I read this play and I was moved.
And now this play, as Austin mentioned, is set during the Depression in small-town Kansas, in the home of a widow whose grown son still lives with her. And into this equation comes a beautiful woman who had lived with them previously and who has gone on to have a life on the road as an actress. The Depression hits and she comes back. And that's when everything breaks loose. Her introduction back into this family. Now that seems to be something of a theme of Inge. This sort of, there's an equilibrium, there is a normalcy, and the normalcy is upended by the arrival of a stranger.
Yes. I never figured that out. You're absolutely right. Yeah, right, yeah.
Now see,
yeah.
We've still got 5 hours of rehearsal time.
Yeah. It's going to be a very productive afternoon, yeah. Yeah, right.
But do you think, am I right, is that a consistent theme of Inge's?
Yes,
and
it is.
And he seems to have an obsession about sort of beautiful, mysterious women.
Or men.
Or men. I mean, Bus Stop has those qualities.
Certainly Picnic is directly about that.
Has those qualities.
Yeah.
And Loss of Roses seems to fit right into that continuum of Inge's.
Yeah.
Even though, isn't it true that in '59, the ending was different than the ending our audiences are going to see?
It wasn't as different as he likes to make out.
He being Inge,
Yeah.
not me.
Yeah, no, yeah. Inge. He said the play was traduced by, Shirley Booth wanted it to end with her character, and which means it would have ended half a page before this ending is. And her character, that's a powerful ending. And then he wanted to end with the character of the beautiful young woman who comes in. And so that would be the last impression the audience had. So he wrote 5 lines to make it end with the younger woman. He did this after it opened on Broadway to show how he really wanted it. But it's not like a different play or anything like that. Feelings run very high in production. The things that playwrights scream at you when you're putting on their play they're not funny at the time, but they're funny when you think about them afterward. And they're very funny when they happen to other people. Yeah.
Let's open up to questions.
Yeah.
What would you like to know about Loss of Roses, about Austin's work, about William Inge himself? What can we answer for you guys? And I think we have a couple mics, so let's come over here to Patrick.
There is a film version of this
Yes.
play.
Yes, it's called The Stripper.
Right, inexplicably called The Stripper, starring Joanne Woodward, who Paul Newman's wife. I happened to watch that here in the last week, and I just wonder if you had any comment about its sticking to the story or complete departure.
I've never seen it. I read a description of it in a biography of Inge. Some people think it's pretty good, and I'm certainly Joanne Woodward. She played the younger woman. But if you see A Loss of Roses, you can kind of extrapolate why it would be called The Stripper. This young woman has a seedy past in the play, and she's going to I won't give anything away. And but Stripper is actually somewhat kind of mild compared to her background in this play. And she arrives at this home where she had been years before the babysitter for the son of the woman who lives there. And at that time she was like virtually a teenage girl. And now she comes back, and she's had quite a colorful career. And she's and she has no money left, even though she has some beautiful clothes she's bought or been given. And she wants very much to go on the straight and narrow. But she's also very, very insecure. But I've never seen The Stripper. I would like to see it. I would like to see any film with Joanne Woodward in it. Is it a good film, do you think? Yeah. Yeah. She's always been a marvelous actress. I thought that from what I hear, in a lot of ways it kind of diverges from A Loss of Roses. But I think Inge just probably turned it over to Hollywood because the play had been a flop and he didn't know what to do with it as a movie. I imagine, I don't know, I wasn't there, but he did sell, he sold the rights to the film to whoever made it.
Here's a totally unrelated piece of trivia about, you mentioned Joanne Woodward, obviously being Paul Newman's wife, and Warren Beatty, this was his Broadway debut was in A Loss of Roses. Well, Inge's earlier play, Picnic, saw the debut of Paul Newman.
Paul Newman and Joanne was an understudy at Picnic, and that's how Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward met.
So Inge had a lot to do with a lot of our big Hollywood stars. There's a question over here.
There are 2 questions.
So you come to town, I'm assuming you don't necessarily know the actors.
Almost all of them are New York actors.
Oh, they are, okay.
And so two or maybe 2 of them I already knew.
Okay.
because they were in the production of Bus Stop that I directed 2 years ago at Olney, Maryland, at that theater. The others are people we found in auditions. We auditioned a whole lot of actors for the other parts when Bob came up to New York in February. And we actually saw a lot of good people, and then we were able to pick the people we picked.
Well, my question was just, how do you, you're kind of getting to know the characters, at the same time you're getting to know the actors. I was just curious how that process works for you.
Well, sometimes it's like the judge's definition of obscenity. I'll know it when I see it, you know. You see an actor and you think, wait, that actually, what you want to do in auditions is stay open, because sometimes an actor can come on and clarify a character in a way before that you've only clarified it sort of abstractly, and then all of a sudden this person comes on and reads the scenes in a certain way, even if the reading isn't that accomplished. Because some actors who are terrific actors don't audition particularly strikingly, and sometimes they do. But anyway, you see, wait, that's who that person is, the character. And you call them back and you get an even deeper sense of that. So it's very pragmatic, the audition process. There's so many famous stories in Broadway history of directors and playwrights saying, no, I don't want to see that actor or that actress. They're totally wrong from my concept of it, and the agent or the actor himself just keeps, or herself keeps, finally they say, all right, come in and read. And then they go, oh my God, that's the part. And they've been saying for months, no, that's not that person. So it's a very pragmatic thing. You try to stay open. I got a part in a film once by virtually blackmailing. They offered me a part I wasn't particularly interested in, although it was a good part. I said, I'll only take that part if you give me the chance to audition for this other one. And they said, well, all right, you can audition, but you're not ever going to get it. And you're going to work on the audition, you're never going to get it. And then you probably won't even take the part you promise you'll take if we give you the audition for the other part, because you'll just get so frustrated. I think there have been 3 such stories in my whole life as an actor, but I got the part I wanted. The guy, and you can always tell when they start to stare at you in disbelief. I can't believe this is actually working, that look. And then they probably even overrate the audition because they thought it was going to be so hopeless. But I find that, particularly as a director, playwrights have a harder time with this, because playwrights do have an image in their mind, or as the famous quote about playwrights, that's not my mother, you know. You try to say, the audience didn't know your mother. But they get sort of very, very strict in what it should be. But a director should stay open, and because you never know, some insight into the character you hadn't quite arrived at yet could be right in front of you. So that's how that works. Yeah.
This is a pleasure, by the way. I'm wondering, have you done any musicals, or have you been involved with any musicals?
I was Muddle the Tailor in the original Fiddler on the Roof.
Oh, wow.
How about that? Yeah. And
You're actually on the Broadway cast recording, aren't you?
I'm on the Broadway cast with Zero Mostel.
Oh, my God.
That's me. The song I sing was put into the show a week and a half before the Broadway opening. We were still on the road. We'd been on the road for weeks. I had some other song before that. And I've been in a few musicals since, including one by Arthur Miller. Few people know that Arthur Miller wrote a musical show once about Adam and Eve. The characters are Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and God and Lucifer and 3 archangels. Arthur Miller, of course, didn't fool around. But it's very funny and touching and beautiful. So I was in that. And a very successful off-Broadway musical some years ago named The Last Sweet Days of Isaac. which ran for a long time. And then 2 or 3 other, I went into Grand Hotel in one of the roles after it had opened. And I've done other musicals out of New York, you know, and stuff like that.
Eh,
What? I've directed 2 musicals. I don't think I'll ever be asked to direct another one. It's a real art. It's a real art. And I've written scripts for one, including one that was done last year at Lincoln Center called A Minister's Wife, which was adapted from the Shaw play by the name of Candida. You'd think it would be easy to adapt that play to it's very hard. But it wasn't bad. And so I've had a lot of experience with musicals. See, I came of age, as they put it, in the golden age of musicals, which is commonly thought to have actually ended with Fiddler on the Roof. That was the last great, huge, popular musical of high quality, at least American musical. The common wisdom is that it began with Oklahoma and ended 21 years later with Fiddler on the Roof. And after that, you have essentially only Stephen Sondheim and the producers, maybe. That's a little simplistic, but so I grew up, when I was a kid, every year, all I would want for Christmas was the album of some new musical. I'm one of those people. And there was always a great one. Even the musical flops in those days were thrilling. And so I've always been obsessed with them.
And you were also in Mother Courage, which...
Yeah, I was in Mother Courage with Meryl Streep in Central Park a few years ago. And that, of course, has a lot of songs in it, in the Brecht original, and then a whole bunch of new songs were written they were adapted differently and composed differently for our version. And the translation was by Tony Kushner. It's a brilliant translation. So that's kind of like a musical. And in fact, I had a song in it. So I've done a lot of them.
There's a question over here.
Yeah.
Your choice. Either the favorite project you've ever been involved in, and talk a little bit, the favorite project you've ever been involved in, or something really bizarre that has happened in some production you've been involved in that would be a great story for us to hear. Take your pick.
The bizarre question, the answer to the bizarre one could go on for 6 hours. You know, like anything that happened on stage in the year I played opposite Zero Mostel, who is an idolized figure in my life. My idols include Zero Mostel and Bill and Hillary Clinton. Those, you know, and he would just do anything. He would do whatever came into his being at any given moment. And we had the great, you probably all know Fiddler on the Roof, the great confrontation scene where the tailor proposes himself to be the husband of his oldest child. And I say, even a poor tailor is entitled to some happiness, and stuff like that. And so in that scene, of course, the part that Zero played was supposed to be astonished and enraged and horrified and everything. The different manifestations he would come up with virtually every night for a year would constitute taken all as a whole, that's the most bizarre. But they were always very interesting, and some of them were utterly inspired. And he sort of kicked a door open for me as an actor. I was a geek actor. I had it all figured out. I would figure out, and I would do my preparations, and I was tense as a board, and I was frightened all the time. He was like a hurricane that blew through my acting apparatus. His total freedom. I don't think anyone other than Zero Mostel should ever be allowed to do the things he was doing on stage. But somehow I gave him, and others did too, a free pass. because he was just so bizarrely inventive and brilliant. And sometimes he would do things that were by any objective standard wrong for the part, but sometimes it would be genius. It wasn't just shtick, it went way past that. And I found him thrilling, but that's bizarre stuff. If any other actor did it, you would refuse ever to work with him again. And, but I would have worked with him 18 more times, you know. Term favorite project, I simply don't know. Practically any production, whether I've acted in them or directed them, of a Chekhov play, those have almost always been pretty thrilling. I don't know, though, really. It's hard to pick a favorite. Mm-hmm.
We can take one more question. Sir.
No disrespect to the people who are here, but I was kind of hoping that the actress who played Helen would be here, because in reading the play, I get the motives for Kenny and I get the motives for Lila, but the mother I have problems with, because sometimes the themes, there are a lot of themes that go through this. An edible theme is not the least of them, and she doesn't seem to have a hint of what's going on sometimes, and sometimes she seems to catch every nuance. And I was just wondering how an actress would play a part like that.
Shirley Booth may have agreed with you. Maybe that's why she left the show. I've always found her very fascinating and complex. One of the more complex characters I've ever read in a play, and I think that's actually part of my fascination with the play. She's in denial a lot, and she has a lot to be in denial about. She's had a traumatic life concerning her son. And yet, I don't know of another part that exactly does this. Her very being in denial and the effort that takes just for her to get through the day and get through her life and be what she considers a responsible parent to her son. She's a single parent. The stress of that also gives her this extraordinary compassion and openness. And so you think, oh, this is going to be, she's going to be a domineering mom. But right from page 2, she's trying to get him to go out on his own. And this kind of, and she actually, she bewilders her son. He doesn't know, she's trying so hard to be a responsible person with him that he can't track it. And he gets all frustrated and confused, and he doesn't want to leave home, even though he's in 100 little ways asserting his independence all the time. I just found all that so complex. You couldn't, in what to me was an interesting way, you couldn't figure it out. Now, the actors are not here because I demanded they not come, because we've been rehearsing so intensely, like over 12-hour spans and 10-hour spans for quite a few days, and working and working and working on this, to me, quite wonderful, but certainly challenging play. And they have their first audience tonight, and I wanted to have them, and we have a long rehearsal this afternoon to make yet some more changes, and I wanted them to be able to sleep all morning if they needed to. I just wouldn't allow them to come. So I'm very sorry to deprive you of them, but it just seemed like, no, I said, you're not allowed to go. So,
Well, we're very glad, Austin, that you took the time to come and join us today and have this conversation about A Loss of Roses and William Inge.
Thank you. See, the difference is I don't have to perform tonight. All I'm expected to do tonight is sit in the audience and have a nervous breakdown, which in a way you can do that and be tired, you know. But they have to perform this wonderfully complex play tonight after days and days, I say, of just endless rehearsals. And an entire rehearsal period of several weeks, so that's why. But thank you so
Well,
much.
the first preview is tonight, We have a second preview tomorrow night. Tonight and tomorrow night, Austin and I will be discussing the play at pre-show. Official opening is Friday, and it runs through the end of the month. So I hope you'll find time in your busy schedules to come and see the production. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and a special thanks to Skip and to everybody here at the Clinton School for making this series possible. We've enjoyed it very much, and thank you all for being here.